The question hit like a bullet. Grandpa, how many people did you kill? Samuel Hayes lay propped against starched pillows in room 247 of Mountain View Nursing Home, Montana. The oxygen tube in his nose hissed softly. His hands, once strong enough to shape dynamite charges in the dark, now trembled against the thin hospital blanket. At 96 years old, his body was failing, but his mind remained sharp as the day he'd first pulled a trigger in anger. Jake Hayes sat in the vinyl chair beside the bed, 26 years old, and carrying the weight of someone twice that age. 8 months back from Fallujah. Eyes that had seen too much. Hands that wouldn't stop shaking when he tried to sleep. His mother, Emily Hayes Miller, had sent him here with instructions to spend time with the old man before it was too late. She'd said Grandpa Sam might understand things the therapists at the VA couldn't. Jake hadn't expected to find the metal box under the bed. It was an old ammunition container, olive drab paint flaking off in patches. The kind that had crossed oceans and continents 70 years ago. Jake had been looking for an extra blanket when his fingers brushed against it. The lock had rusted through decades ago. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that smelled of gun oil and time, lay a notebook. The cover was stained dark brown. Blood, Jake realized. Old blood that had soaked through canvas and paper and memory. The first page read, Sergeant Samuel Hayes, U.S. Army Pioneer Battalion, July 1944 to May 1945. Kill count unknown. Soul count lost. Jake had been reading for 20 minutes before Sam woke from his afternoon nap. Now they stared at each other across the question that hung between them like smoke. Sam's eyes still ice blue despite the years fixed on his grandson. When he spoke, his voice was rough as gravel on steel. I don't know, Jake. I never counted. Couldn't bring myself to. Jake held up the notebook. This says, kill count unknown. Why write it if you weren't going to track it? Because writing it down made it real, made it something I'd have to remember. And remembering is the punishment we deserve. The words settled heavy in the antiseptic air. Outside the window, Montana spring was turning the mountains green. Inside, two men who'd been to war sat with ghosts neither could shake. Jake flipped through pages filled with technical drawings, chemical formulas, measurements, and careful block letters. Scattered between the calculations were phrases that made his stomach tighten. God forgive me. They burned alive. Mike would have hated this. Grandma Emily never told me about this, Jake said. Never said anything about what you did in the war. Just that you were a hero, that you came home and took care of her and lived a good life. Your grandmother doesn't know half of it, doesn't know the worst of it. I kept it from her because she was the only pure thing left in my life, and I couldn't bear to poison that. Sam's chest rose and fell with effort. But you need to know, Jake. You need to hear this story. Why? Because you're carrying the same weight I carried. I can see it in your eyes. The VA sends you to therapy, and they talk about post-traumatic stress, and they give you pills, and they tell you it gets better with time. Sam's hands shot out faster than Jake expected, gripping his wrist with surprising strength. They're lying. It doesn't get better. You just learn to carry it. And if you're going to carry it without it killing you, you need to hear how I carried mine. Jake's throat felt tight. What did you do, Grandpa? Sam released his wrist and gestured at the notebook. Read the title page again. Out loud. Kill count unknown. Soul count lost. That's what I did, Jake. I invented a weapon the Germans called barbaric. And they weren't wrong. Sam's eyes drifted to the window. But Jake could tell he wasn't seeing Montana mountains. He was seeing somewhere else. Somewhen else. I built something that burned men alive, trained soldiers to use it, fired it myself into buildings full of enemy troops, and listened to them scream as they died. And the worst part, the part that's kept me awake for 70 years, is that I'd do it all again. The machines around the bed beeped their steady rhythm. Jake felt his own heart beating too fast. In Fallujah during the second offensive, his unit had used white phosphorus rounds on an insurgent stronghold. The building had lit up like hell's preview. The screams had lasted longer than seemed possible. In Fallujah, Jake started, but his voice broke. He tried again. We used white phosphorus. There were civilians inside. We didn't know until after. Sam's eyes snapped back to his grandson. Something passed between them in that moment. Recognition. Understanding. The terrible knowledge that war makes monsters of good men And the worst part is sometimes it's necessary. Then you need to hear this more than I thought, Sam said, because you're standing where I stood in 1944 trying to figure out if you're a hero or a murderer. And the answer, Jake, is that you're both. We all were. Both things can be true at the same time. That's the burden. That's what you carry until the day you die. Sam settled back against the pillows, gathering strength. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Younger, stronger. The voice of a man telling a story he'd never told before because telling it might kill him, but not telling it might kill his grandson. I was born in Butte, Montana, 1919, mining town. My father went down into the copper mines when he was 14 and died down there when I was 12. Cave-in. They found his body 3 days later, crushed under a ton of rock. My mother tried to hold things together, but tuberculosis got her when I was 18. That left me with Emily. She was 9 years old, and I was supposed to take care of her, but I couldn't. Not on miner's wages when I could get work. Had to put her in an orphanage in Helena. She wrote me letters every single week asking when I was coming to get her. The pain in Sam's voice was fresh despite 7 decades. Jake understood. Some wounds never heal. They just scab over and wait for something to tear them open again. So I went into the mines like my father. Learned explosives because that's where the money was. I was good at it, Jake. Really good. Could calculate powder charges in my head. Knew exactly how much dynamite to use just by looking at rock face. Other miners would ask how I knew, and I'd tell them I could hear what the stone needed. They thought I was crazy, but I was right every time. Sam's hands moved as he talked, shaping invisible charges in the air. But I did it by feel, not by the book. The company wanted everything by regulation. I wanted results. One day there was a miscalculation by a supervisor. Big Blast scheduled 7 men working the tunnel. I saw the setup and knew it was wrong. Too much powder in the wrong places. I told the super. He told me to shut up and do my job. So I did my job. I went down before the blast and moved 3 sticks of dynamite, created a countercharge that would redirect the force, save those 7 men when the blast went wrong exactly like I said it would. They gave you a medal? Jake asked. They fired me. Unauthorized use of explosives? Union blacklisted me too because I made the supervisors look bad. Word got around, couldn't get work anywhere. That was 1940. I had $40 to my name and a sister in an orphanage who needed $200 a year to stay there. I was 21 years old and I'd run out of options. Sam paused, his breathing labored. Jake wanted to tell him to rest, but he could see his grandfather needed to tell this, needed Jake to hear it. Then Pearl Harbor happened, December 7th, 1941. I enlisted the next day, not because I was patriotic, not because I wanted to fight fascism, because the Army paid $50 a month and I needed that money to get Emily out of that orphanage. That's the truth nobody wants to hear. I didn't go to war to be a hero. I went because I was desperate and broke and out of options. The raw honesty cut through the room like a blade. Jake had enlisted after 9/11, caught up in the wave of patriotic fury. But underneath that, hadn't he also been running? Running from a dead-end job, from a girlfriend who wanted more than he could give, from a future that looked small and meaningless. They saw mining explosives expert on my application and stamped me for combat engineers. By 1944, I was a sergeant in a pioneer battalion. We were the guys who built bridges and cleared obstacles and blew up enemy fortifications. The job nobody wanted because you had to get close to do it, close enough to see their faces when you killed them. Sam's eyes closed. When he opened them again, they were wet. June 6, 1944, D-Day. I hit Omaha Beach on the second wave. Lost half my squad before we made the seawall. Spent the next month fighting through the hedgerows. That's where I met Mike Daniels. Tennessee boy, worked coal mines before the war. We bonded over explosives and bad coffee and letters from home. He became the best friend I'd ever had. Closer than brothers because we'd seen each other at our worst and still chose to stand together. The machines beeped. Outside, a truck rumbled past on the highway. Inside the room, time had collapsed. Jake could see it in his grandfather's face. He wasn't in Montana anymore. He was in France. Summer 1944. Young again and terrified and trying not to die. July 15th. We were clearing a village near Caen. Germans had fortified a farmhouse. Machine gun position covering the main road. Command wanted it taken out. Mike volunteered to place a satchel charge. I tried to stop him. Told him it was too exposed, too dangerous. He said somebody had to do it and he was the best we had at getting close without being seen. Sam's voice cracked. His hands gripped the blanket so hard his knuckles went white. I watched through binoculars. Watched him crawl 200 yards across open ground. Watched him reach the farmhouse wall. Watched him arm the satchel charge. Then a German soldier looked out the window. Must have seen movement. They shot Mike from maybe 20 feet away. Hit him in the gut. He went down. Jake's own hands were trembling now. He'd seen friends die. Knew the particular hell of watching and being unable to help. Mike didn't die fast. Took 40 minutes. I crawled out to him even though command ordered me to stay back. Held him while he bled out. He kept calling for his mama. 23 years old, Tennessee coal miner, toughest son of a bitch I ever met, and he died crying for his mother like a little boy. Last thing he said was, "Sam, don't let them die like this. Find a better way." Silence filled the room like water, deep and heavy and drowning. 2 days later, Captain Edward Blake called me to his command post. Blake was a good officer. Boston man, designed bridges before the war. Mormon, didn't drink, prayed before every operation. But more than that, he cared about his men. Kept a notebook with every single name of every soldier we lost. When I got to his tent, he looked like he'd aged 10 years in a month. Sam's voice shifted, taking on the cadence of remembered conversation. He said, "Hayes, we're losing 30 to 40 men every week to these fortified buildings. Artillery destroys everything. Infantry assault is suicide. I need something that can hit hard from distance without exposing our boys. You worked with explosives in civilian life. You got any ideas?" I thought about Mike, thought about the 12 other men we'd lost that week, thought about Emily writing me letters asking when I was coming home. And I said, "Give me 3 days, sir." Blake showed me something they'd pulled from a British supply dump, called it a Northover projector. Some World War I relic the Brits had dusted off when they thought Hitler was going to invade. It was supposed to be an anti-tank weapon, basically just a metal tube on a stand that fired Molotov cocktails. By 1944, it was completely obsolete. German tanks had too much armor. We had bazookas and PIATs that worked better. Most units had thrown them away. Sam's eyes lit up with something Jake recognized. The same look he'd seen in EOD techs when they found an unexploded bomb and started figuring out how it worked. But I looked at that Northover and I didn't see a tank weapon. I saw a short-range mortar, a tube that could throw heavy objects about 100 yards with decent accuracy. If it could throw bottles full of gasoline, it could throw other things. And if it could throw other things, it could throw explosives. "You turned it into a grenade launcher," Jake said. "That's what they call it now. We didn't have a name for it then. We just knew we needed to kill Germans without getting within rifle range." Sam's voice dropped. "The hard part wasn't making something explode. That's easy. The hard part was making it explode at the right time. Not in the barrel, not in midair, but when it hit the target." Sam pointed at the notebook in Jake's hands. "Open to page 3. You'll see my calculations, and you'll see how many times I almost killed myself figuring it out." Jake turned the pages carefully. The paper was brittle with age. He found sketches of the Northover measurements formulas he didn't understand, and between them, short entries that read like prayers or confessions. Test 1, July 17th, grenade in tin can, exploded in barrel, thought I was dead. Johnny Walker saved by stone wall. Jesus Christ, that was close. Test 2, July 19th, stronger can, more padding. Grenade didn't explode, had to crawl out and disarm. Hands shaking so bad could barely work fuse. Test 3, July 20th, can broke apart midair. Grenade tumbled. Explosion 40 yards from target. Useless. Sam watched Jake read. That was my assistant, Johnny Walker. Kid from Alabama, 19 years old. Every time we tested, we were rolling dice with our lives, and I made him roll with me because I needed someone to load rounds while I aimed. "Did he make it home?" Jake asked, though something in his grandfather's face told him the answer. "He made it home. Alabama, 1946. Put a pistol in his mouth and pulled the trigger in 1947. His wife told me at the funeral he'd been having nightmares about explosions. Couldn't stand loud noises. Couldn't hold a job. I don't know if it was my fault, but I think maybe it was. I think those tests broke something in him that never healed. Jake thought about the guys from his unit. 3 had killed themselves since they got back. 1 had tried and failed. The VA statistics said 22 veterans a day, every day. Numbers too big to comprehend until one of them was your friend. Test 4 worked, Sam continued. July 21st, I stopped using grenades. Built my own charge from blocks of composition B, shaped it like a cylinder, wrapped it in cloth, added an impact fuse from a rifle grenade. Put the whole thing in a weak tin carrier that would tear apart during launch but keep the charge stable until firing. Loaded it into the Northover. Aimed at a wrecked German truck 100 yards away. Said a prayer even though I'd never been religious. And I fired. Sam's voice carried wonder even now 70 years later. It worked perfectly. The charge launched clean. The carrier disintegrated like it was supposed to. The bomb flew in a beautiful arc and hit that truck dead center. The explosion was massive, way bigger than a grenade, created a crater 2 meters wide. I just sat there shaking. Johnny was crying. We'd done it. After almost dying 3 times, we'd actually done it. So you were a hero, Jake said. That's what I thought. Sam's face darkened. Then I loaded another round, different Northover projector, same design, fired it, and the whole thing exploded in my face. Jake's breath caught. The projector had a defect. Nothing to do with my design, just bad luck. The explosion destroyed the weapon and sent shrapnel everywhere. Piece of metal this big went past my head so close, I felt the wind. Sam held his fingers an inch apart. Johnny lost hearing in his left ear permanently. I got 3 pieces of shrapnel in my shoulder. Battalion medic dug them out while I bit down on a leather strap. Sam pulled down his hospital gown, revealing a shoulder pocked with old scars. 3 distinct marks where metal had punched through flesh decades ago. Captain Blake came to see me in the aid station. Told me he was shutting the project down. Too dangerous, too unpredictable. And I drugged up on morphine and bleeding, and scared, I grabbed his wrist and I said, "Sir, Mike Daniels died because we couldn't hit that farmhouse from range. How many more Mikes are we going to lose before you let me try again?" Sam's eyes locked onto Jake's. Blake stared at me for a long time. Then he said, "One more test, Hayes. If it fails, we're done. If it succeeds, you train every pioneer in this battalion." 2 weeks later, I had 12 working rounds, and Captain Blake had a mission for me. The story paused there, hanging in the air. Jake could feel the weight of what was coming. His grandfather hadn't told him about white phosphorus yet, hadn't explained the notebook entry that said soul count lost. The Regina Rifle Regiment needed to take a German strong point at Caen, Sam continued. They'd tried twice, lost 40 men. Germans had the position, fortified heavy. Machine guns prepared defenses, interlocking fields of fire. It was a killing ground. Blake volunteered my experimental weapon. I set up in a barn 80 meters from the German position, close enough to hit, far enough that their machine guns couldn't reach us effectively. Sam's breathing had become labored. The oxygen hissed, but he pushed on. I was terrified, Jake. My shoulder still hurt from the shrapnel. I kept seeing that explosion, kept feeling the wind of metal passing my head. Every time I loaded a round, I wondered if this was the one that would kill me. But I thought about Mike Daniels dying slow. Thought about those 40 Regina rifles who'd already died trying to take this position. Thought about my sister, Emily, in that orphanage needing me to come home with enough money to get her out. And I fired. The words fell like stones. The round flew perfect. Went through a second-story window. Exploded inside the building. I heard the blast. Heard the screams. German soldiers started running out. Canadian infantry cut them down as they fled. I fired again. Hit another building. More explosions. More screams. I fired 12 rounds in 30 minutes. By the time I stopped, the German position was collapsing. The Regina rifles took it with light casualties. Blake grabbed my shoulder, the one that still had stitches in it, and he said, "Hayes, you just saved 40 lives. Sam's voice dropped to barely a whisper. I went behind the barn and vomited until I dry heaved. Not from fear, from relief, and from the sound of Germans screaming as they died from explosives I'd built. The room felt smaller. The machines beeped their rhythm. Outside, the Montana sun was setting. painting the mountains gold and red. That should be the end of the story, Sam said. Sergeant invents weapon saves American lives, goes home a hero. That's what they'd write in the history books if anyone remembered. He pointed at the notebook. But 3 days later, a kid approached me. Skinny kid with thick glasses and ink-stained fingers. He said, Sergeant Hayes, I'm Private Daniel Marshall. I studied chemistry at University of Michigan before I enlisted. Captain Blake said you might need help improving those rounds. And I looked at this kid, this smart kid, who should have been in a lab somewhere instead of a war zone, and I asked him, you ever work with white phosphorus, Private? Jake's stomach dropped. Danny's eyes lit up like I just asked him about Christmas morning. He said, yes, Sergeant. Why? And I pointed at the German building that was still smoking from my rounds, and I said, because high explosive makes them run, but I want something that makes them want to run. Sam closed his eyes. That's the moment I became the man who invented the barbaric weapon. Not when I built the Northover modification, not when I killed those Germans at Caen, but when I looked at a smart kid from Michigan and asked him to help me make something worse, something that would burn men alive instead of just killing them. That's the moment I lost my soul, Jake. And I knew it even then. I knew it, and I did it anyway. The confession hung in the air between them. Jake wanted to say something, wanted to offer absolution or understanding or anything that would ease the pain in his grandfather's voice. But he had nothing. He'd made his own choices in Fallujah, choices that haunted him. Who was he to judge? You want me to stop? Sam asked. It gets worse from here, a lot worse. The phosphorus rounds, Antwerp, the cathedral. All of it gets worse. Jake thought about the nightmares he'd been having. Thought about the therapist at the VA who kept asking him to talk about his feelings. Thought about the Xanax prescription in his pocket that he'd been taking too many of lately. Thought about his 3 friends who'd eaten bullets rather than keep living with what they'd done. No, he said, I need to hear it. All of it. Sam opened his eyes, looked at his grandson with something that might have been pride, or might have been sorrow, or might have been both. Okay then, but you have to promise me something, Jake. When I'm done, when you've heard the whole story, you have to decide. Was I a hero or was I a monster? Because I've spent 70 years trying to figure that out, and I still don't know the answer. The sun had set completely now. The room was dim, except for the green glow of medical equipment. Outside, the highway was quiet. Inside, an old man prepared to tell the rest of his story to the one person who might understand. Danny Marshall, Sam began again, his voice stronger now, committed to the telling. 22 years old, from Ann Arbor, Michigan. His father was a chemistry professor at the university. Danny was a genius. Memorized the periodic table at 12. Full scholarship to college. Then Pearl Harbor happened and he enlisted against his father's wishes. They didn't speak after that. Danny carried that guilt every day. Jake pulled his chair closer. He came to me with sketches and formulas I could barely read. Remember, I dropped out of school at 14 to work the mines, but I understood results. Danny told me he could mix white phosphorus from smokes grenades with composition B explosive. If the ratio was right, we'd create something that didn't just explode. It would burn, and it would keep burning. Water wouldn't stop it, dirt wouldn't stop it. The only way to stop a white phosphorus is to deny it oxygen or let it burn through whatever it's stuck to. Sam's hands trembled as he spoke. I asked him, "You're talking about burning people alive, Marshall." And he looked me right in the eye and said, "I'm talking about clearing buildings without losing our men, Sergeant." And God help me, I thought about Mike Daniels, thought about those 40 Regina rifles, thought about Emily's letters asking when I was coming home. And I said, "Show me." The words fell into silence. Jake understood the weight of them. That moment when you make the choice that changes everything. When you cross the line you can never uncross. He'd had his own moment in Fallujah, standing outside that building, calling in the strike even though intelligence said there might be civilians inside. Making the call because it was his job, because his men were depending on him, because in war you don't get perfect choices. You get terrible options and worse options, and you pick the one that keeps your people alive. Danny worked through the night, Sam continued. Set up a lab in an old barn. I watched him measure and mix with equipment he'd built from captured German supplies. He tested ratios on paper before trying them. At 3 in the morning, he looked up at me with red eyes and said, 3 parts composition B, 1 part white phosphorus sergeant. That's the answer. Sam's voice dropped even lower. We tested it the next morning. Used a derelict German bunker as target. The round hit and exploded. But after the explosion came something else. White flames, intense heat that didn't stop. The interior of that bunker burned for 3 minutes straight. I watched it through binoculars, fascinated and horrified. When it finally stopped, the inside of the bunker was scorched black. Everything organic had burned away. I said, "Jesus Christ, Danny." And he said, "It works, doesn't it, Sergeant?" And I said yes, because it did work. It worked perfectly. And that's when I knew we'd crossed a line. Not a legal line, a moral one. The kind of line that you can't see until you're already on the wrong side of it. Jake understood that too. The line was invisible until you looked back and realized you'd left something behind. Something you couldn't retrieve. Your innocence maybe, or your certainty that you were one of the good guys, or the ability to sleep through the night without seeing faces. 2 weeks later, we got orders for Antwerp, Sam said. His eyes had gone distant again, seeing across decades. September 1944. The port was crucial for Allied logistics. Germans had fortified the warehouse district. American Pioneer Battalion was attached to Canadian forces for the assault. Captain Blake assigned me and Danny to support an infantry operation against 8 warehouses. The mission was simple: bombard with phosphorus rounds, force evacuation, capture or kill fleeing Germans. Sam stopped. His breathing had become ragged. The oxygen hissed louder. Jake moved to press the call button for a nurse, but Sam waved him off. "Not yet. I need to finish this part. You need to hear what happened at Antwerp, because that's where it all became real. That's where I understood what I'd created." He gathered himself. We set up 2 northovers across a canal, 100 meters from the warehouses. Me, Danny, Johnny Walker, and 2 new guys. William Turner from Chicago and David Lee from Oregon. I operated one gun. Turner operated the other. Danny supervised ammunition. We had 20 phosphorus rounds. The plan was to saturate the warehouses, force the Germans out, let infantry handle the rest. Sam's hands gripped the blanket again. I loaded the first phosphorus round myself, aimed at the largest warehouse, said a prayer I didn't believe in, and I fired. The round hit the second floor, exploded. Then came the whoosh. That's the sound phosphorus makes when it ignites, like all the air getting sucked into hell. Through my binoculars, I could see inside through blown-out windows. Everything was burning, white-hot flames spreading impossibly fast, and then I heard the screaming. His voice cracked. It was different from normal combat, Jake. Normal combat, men scream and then they die. Quick, phosphorus, they scream and they keep screaming because the burning doesn't stop. I heard one man scream for 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Jake felt cold despite the warm room. I fired 5 more rounds. Turner fired 6. All 12 hit warehouses. Within minutes, the entire waterfront was burning. Germans ran out of buildings. Many were on fire. Uniforms burning, skin burning. Some jumped into the canal to put out the flames, but phosphorus burns underwater. I watched one kid, maybe 19, thrashing in the water, with flames still visible below the surface. Drowning and burning at the same time. Sam's breath came in gasps now. American infantry shot the fleeing Germans. It wasn't combat, it was slaughter. Some tried to surrender, hands raised, still burning. Our troops shot them anyway. Mercy killings, they said. Johnny Walker vomited. Turner was shaking. Danny just stared blank. And me, I watched it all through binoculars, numbly loading and firing like it was just another day at work. Like I was back in the mines, placing charges. Like the screaming was just rock breaking instead of men dying. The machines beeped faster. A nurse would come soon. But Sam pushed on the words coming faster now, like a confession that had been held back 70 years and couldn't be stopped. There was a medic there, Tom Crawford. Tennessee kid, worked as veterinary assistant before the war. Good with injuries, steady hands. They brought him a German prisoner. Teenager with phosphorus embedded in wounds across his chest and arms and face. Every time Crawford tried to clean the wounds, the phosphorus reignited. The kid would scream and thrash and beg in German. Crawford tried water, made it worse. Tried covering the wounds, phosphorus burned through the bandages. Tried digging out the fragments, but they both were too deep and they reignited every time they hit air. Sam was crying now, tears running down his weathered face. The kid died after 40 minutes, not from the wounds, from shock and agony. Crawford sat there silent for an hour afterward. Another medic asked if he was okay. Crawford said, "I'm a healer. I'm supposed to save people. What the fuck did we just do?" The question echoed in the small room. Jake had no answer for it. Neither had Sam, not in 70 years. "I was standing outside the medical tent," Sam whispered. "Heard everything, heard the screams, heard Crawford's question. And I had no answer then, and I have no answer now. What did we do, Jake? We saved American lives. We created hell. Both things are true. Which one matters more?" Jake opened his mouth, but nothing came out. In Fallujah, after the white phosphorus strike, after they'd gone through the building and found the bodies, he'd asked himself the same question. Saved his unit. Killed civilians. Both true. Which mattered more? The weapon spread after that. Sam said, his voice barely audible now. "Other pioneer units wanted it. I trained teams. Danny improved the formula. We became experts at burning men alive. And every night I'd write letters to Emily about how the war was going fine, and I'd be home soon, and we'd get a house together, and everything would be okay. I was lying to her. I was lying to myself. Nothing was okay. Nothing would ever be okay again." The door opened. A nurse came in, saw Sam's distress, checked the monitors. "Mr. Hayes, you need to rest. Your vitals are elevated." Sam ignored her, his eyes locked on Jake. "There's more, Jake. The cathedral. The prisoner who called me barbaric to my face. The confession on the ship. Home. Bobby Fischer in his diary. The day I fired my last shot. All of it. But you need to know something before I tell you the rest." He reached under his pillow with shaking hands and pulled out something small. A piece of twisted metal, scarred and blackened. "This is from the Northover barrel that exploded during Test 5. The one that almost killed me and Johnny. I've carried it for 70 years. Every time I moved, every place I lived, I kept it with me." "You know why?" Jake shook his head, unable to speak. "Because I needed to remember that every choice has a cost. I made a weapon that saved American lives. The cost was I burned Germans alive, traumatized Danny Marshall, drove Johnny Walker to suicide, eventually broke Bobby Fischer's spirit and lost my own soul. Both things are true. Saved lives. Lost soul. You can't have one without the other." Sam pressed the metal fragment into Jake's hand. It was warm from being held close to his grandfather's heart for 70 years. "Take this. Remember what I'm telling you. You're not a hero, Jake. You're not a villain. You're a human who made impossible choices in impossible situations. And you're going to carry that burden every day for the rest of your life. The question isn't whether you deserve it. The question is whether you can carry it without it killing you." The nurse increased the oxygen flow. "Mr. Hayes, please." Sam lay back against the pillows, exhausted, but his eyes stayed on Jake. "Come back tomorrow. I'll tell you the rest." Jake closed his fingers around the metal fragment. It felt heavy, heavier than metal should feel. "I'll be here, Grandpa." "Good." Sam's eyes closed. His breathing evened out as the medication took effect. But before he drifted off, he whispered one more thing. "Jake, whatever you did in Fallujah, whatever choice you made, that's eating you alive. Remember this. The burden is the price. You pay it. You don't get escape. You don't get forgiveness. You just get to wake up every morning and try to be a better person than you were yesterday. Some days you succeed. Most days you fail. But you keep trying. That's all any of us can do." Jake sat in the vinyl chair as his grandfather slept. Outside Montana, night had fallen complete. Inside, he turned the metal fragment over and over in his hands. A piece of a weapon that had changed history in small ways and changed men in permanent ones. He opened the notebook again, flipped past the technical drawings and formulas to a page near the end. The handwriting was shakier here, written years later maybe, decades later. "To whoever reads this after I'm gone, I invented a weapon Germans called barbaric. They weren't wrong. I saved American lives. Also true. I destroyed my own soul doing it. Also true. The question isn't, was I hero or monster? The question is, can you live with being both? If answer is yes, proceed with caution. If answer is no good, You're a better man than I. If you're a soldier carrying burden like I carried, like my grandson Jake carries, know this. The burden is the price. You pay it. You don't get escape. You don't get forgiveness. You get wake up every morning and try to be better. Some days succeed, most days fail. Keep trying. That's all any of us can do. Sam Hayes, Sergeant U.S. Army, inventor of barbaric weapon, saver of lives, taker of lives, human being. Jake closed the notebook carefully. Tomorrow he would come back. Tomorrow he would hear the rest. About the cathedral and the prisoner and the decades of carrying the weight. But tonight he sat in the gathering dark with a piece of twisted metal in his hand and his grandfather's confession echoing in his mind. Both things can be true. He was starting to understand what that meant. Jake returned the next morning to find his grandfather already awake, staring out the window at mountains he'd seen every day for decades but never really stopped seeing. The notebook lay open on the bedside table. Sam's breakfast tray sat untouched. When he heard Jake enter, he didn't turn his head. "Did you sleep?" Sam asked. "No." "Good. That means you're taking this seriously." Sam finally looked at his grandson. The old man's eyes were clearer today, sharper. Like telling the first part of the story had lifted some weight, or maybe redistributed it. "Did you bring the metal piece?" Jake pulled it from his pocket. He'd held it all night, feeling the rough edges dig into his palm. In the darkness of his motel room, he'd thought about Fallujah, about the white phosphorus strike, about the faces he'd seen afterward in the rubble. "I dreamed about them last night," Jake said. "The civilians in that building. The ones we didn't know were there." Sam nodded slowly. "They never leave. The faces. I still dream about a German kid in Antwerp burning in canal water 70 years ago, and I can still see every detail. The way the flames looked underwater. The way he thrashed. You don't forget. You just learn to carry it." Jake sat in the same vinyl chair. The notebook was open to a page covered in chemical formulas and ratios. At the top, in Danny Marshall's neat handwriting, 3-to-1 ratio, composition B to white phosphorus. Optimal burn time 180 seconds. Optimal dispersion 4-meter radius. God forgive us. "Danny wrote that last part," Sam said, noticing where Jake was looking. "The God forgive us. He added it 3 weeks after we'd already used the phosphorus rounds at Antwerp, after he'd seen what they did, after it was too late to take it back." Sam settled back against the pillows, gathering strength. When he spoke again, his voice had that quality of remembering, of being pulled back through decades into moments he'd tried to forget. "I need to tell you about Danny Marshall. Really tell you. Because he's the one who made it all possible, and he's the one who paid the highest price for it. Well, second highest. Bobby Fischer paid more. But I'm getting ahead of myself." The machines beeped their rhythm. Outside, morning sun painted the Montana landscape gold. Inside, an old man prepared to confess the middle chapters of his personal hell. Danny was from Ann Arbor, Michigan. His father taught chemistry at the university. Danny grew up in classrooms and laboratories. He memorized the periodic table when he was 12 years old, built a home lab in his basement when he was 14, got a full scholarship to study chemical engineering. He was the kind of smart that makes you uncomfortable because you realize how much you don't know. Sam's hands moved as he talked, shaping invisible beakers and formulas in the air. His father wanted him to finish his degree. Told him science was supposed to save lives, not take them. Told him the war would be over soon and educated men would be needed to rebuild. But Danny enlisted anyway. January 1942. His father didn't speak to him after that, didn't write, didn't answer Danny's letters. Just cut him off completely because Danny had chosen war over science. Jake understood family disappointment. His own father had barely spoken to him after he'd enlisted, called it a waste, said college was the path to success. They'd reconciled eventually, but those first years had been cold. Danny carried that guilt every single day, Sam continued. I'd see him writing letters to his father that he never sent. Pages and pages of trying to explain why he'd made the choice he'd made, trying to justify it. But how do you justify choosing to kill over choosing to create? How do you explain that sometimes the world needs killers more than it needs builders? The question hung in the air like smoke. When Danny approached me about the phosphorus rounds, I thought he was just being smart, applying his knowledge to solve a tactical problem. But after Antwerp, after we'd seen what the phosphorus did, I found him one night in the barn we use as a lab. He was crying, not making noise, just sitting there in the dark with tears running down his face. Sam's voice grew quieter. I asked him what was wrong. He showed me a telegram. His father had died 3 weeks earlier. Heart attack. Danny had gotten the news but hadn't told anyone. He'd just kept working, kept improving the phosphorus formula, kept calculating burn times and dispersion patterns. And he said to me, my father told me that science was supposed to save lives. Now he's dead, and I'm using everything he taught me to burn people alive. What does that make me, Sergeant? The machines beeped. A distant phone rang somewhere in the nursing home. Sam waited for silence before continuing. I didn't have an answer for him. Still don't. I said the only thing I could think of. I told him my own father died in a mine collapse when I was 12. Told him I'd always wondered if I'd learned explosives better faster, maybe I could have saved him. Now I was good with explosives and I was using them to kill people. I told him life was messed up like that. Sometimes the skills that should save people end up destroying them. What did he say? Jake asked. He said, 3 parts composition B to 1 part white phosphorus, Sergeant. That's the answer. Just went right back to the work. Like if he could make the formula perfect enough, it would justify everything. Like precision could somehow make burning people alive acceptable. Sam closed his eyes, remembering. We tested the ratio the next morning, used a derelict German bunker about 100 yards behind our lines. I fired the round myself. It hit center mass, exploded. Then the white flames came. Intense heat that stuck to everything. The phosphorus burned for exactly 3 minutes. When it was done, the inside of that bunker was scorched black. Everything organic had been consumed. I watched through binoculars, fascinated and horrified in equal measure. His eyes opened wet with tears he didn't bother to hide. I said, Jesus Christ, Danny. And he said, it works, doesn't it, Sergeant? And I said yes, because it did work. It worked perfectly. And that's the moment I knew we'd crossed a line we couldn't uncross. Not a legal line, a moral one. The kind you don't see until you're already on the wrong side. Jake thought about his own line, standing outside that building in Fallujah. Intelligence report said high-value target inside. Also said possible civilian presence. His lieutenant had asked for his assessment. Jake had looked at his men tired and scared and trusting him to make the right call. He'd called in the strike. 2 weeks later, we got orders for Antwerp, Sam said. The story was accelerating now, pulling them both into its current. September 1944. The port was crucial. Germans had fortified warehouse districts, perfect defensive positions with interlocking fields of fire. Captain Blake assigned me and Danny to support an infantry assault on 8 warehouses. The mission was simple on paper. Saturate with phosphorus rounds. Force evacuation. Capture or kill fleeing Germans. Sam's breathing quickened. The oxygen hissed louder. We set up 2 northovers across a canal, 100 meters from target. My team was me, Danny, Johnny Walker, and 2 new replacements. William Turner from Chicago worked as a machinist. David Lee from Oregon logger before the war. I took 1 gun, Turner took the other. Danny supervised ammunition. We had 20 phosphorus rounds ready. The old man's hands gripped the blanket. I loaded the first round. My hands were steady. That's what scared me most. How steady my hands were. Like I'd done this 1,000 times instead of never using phosphorus in actual combat. I aimed at the largest warehouse, calculated the trajectory in my head, and I fired. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The round hit the 2nd floor, exploded. Then came the sound I'll never forget. This whoosh, like all the air in the world getting sucked into hell. Through my binoculars, I could see inside through the blown-out windows, white flames spreading. Not like normal fire, faster, hotter, sticking to everything it touched. And then the screaming started. Sam stopped. His chest heaved. The nurse monitoring station light flickered, but nobody came. Jake waited, knowing his grandfather needed to push through this part, needed to say it out loud. It was different from normal combat screaming, Jake. When men get hit by bullets or shrapnel, they scream and then they die. Quick. Or they scream and then they go into shock. But phosphorus, the screaming doesn't stop. It goes on and on because the burning doesn't stop. I heard one man scream for 10 minutes. I timed it. 10 full minutes of screaming before his voice finally gave out or he finally died. I don't know which. Jake's hands were shaking now. He remembered sounds from Fallujah, children crying in the rubble, a woman calling out in Arabic. The sounds hadn't stopped for hours. I fired 5 more rounds. Sam continued, his voice mechanical, now reciting facts to avoid feeling them. Turner fired 6. All 12 hit warehouses. Within 5 minutes, the entire waterfront was burning. Germans started evacuating. Dozens of them. Many were on fire. Uniforms burning, skin burning, hair burning. Some tried to beat out the flames, but you can't beat out phosphorus. It just keeps burning. His hands moved, demonstrating. Some jumped into the canal, thought water would save them. But phosphorus burns underwater. I watched through binoculars. I watched a kid, maybe 19 years old, jump into that canal. He went under and the flames went with him. Underwater fire. He surfaced, still burning. Went under again. Surfaced. His screams were different underwater, muffled, like hearing someone scream through a pillow. He drowned and burned at the same time. Both things killed him. I don't know which one finished him first. Sam's voice cracked. American infantry was positioned to capture fleeing Germans. They shot them as they ran out of burning buildings. It wasn't combat, it was slaughter. Some Germans tried to surrender, hands raised, white flags. But their hands were on fire, so they couldn't hold the flags. Their clothes were burning, so nobody could tell if they were armed. Our troops shot them anyway. Called it mercy. Maybe it was, but it looked like execution. Jake felt sick. In Fallujah, after the white phosphorus strike, they'd gone through the building. Found bodies, some still burning, some already burned. A woman clutching 2 children, all 3 dead. The intelligence had been wrong about it being just combatants. Intelligence was always wrong about something. There was a medic, Sam said. Tom Crawford, 24 years old, from Tennessee, worked as a veterinary assistant before the war. Good with injuries, calm under pressure, never lost a patient he could save. After the attack, they brought him a German prisoner. Kid maybe 19, phosphorus embedded in wounds across his chest, arms, face. Sam's voice grew hollow, like he was describing something from very far away. Crawford tried to treat him. Every time he cleaned the wounds, the phosphorus reignited. The kid would scream and thrash. Crawford tried water. Made it worse. Phosphorus just burns hotter with water. He tried covering the wounds. Phosphorus burned through the bandages. He tried digging out the fragments with forceps, but they were too deep. And every time they hit air, they reignited. Every single time. Tears ran down Sam's weathered face. The kid died after 40 minutes, not from the wounds themselves, from shock, from agony, from his body just giving up because it couldn't take anymore. Crawford sat there afterward, silent, for an hour, just sitting. Another medic asked if he was okay, and Crawford said, "I'm a healer. I'm supposed to save people." What the hell did we just do? The question echoed through decades, through the small hospital room, through Jake's own memories of trying to help civilians in Fallujah and realizing he was the reason they needed help. "I was standing outside the medical tent," Sam whispered. "I heard everything, the screams, Crawford's question, and I had no answer. No answer then, no answer now, 70 years later. What did we do? We cleared those warehouses with minimal American casualties. We created hell on earth. Both things are true. Which matters more?" Silence filled the room like water, deep and cold and drowning. "The weapon spread after that," Sam continued, his voice stronger now, pushing through. "Other pioneer units heard about it, wanted to know how it worked. I spent the next month training teams, teaching them how to mix the phosphorus, how to load the rounds, how to aim, how to kill efficiently. I became an expert at teaching men how to burn other men alive." He laughed bitterly. "Captain Blake commended me, said I'd saved hundreds of American lives. Maybe I did, but I'd also created something that made hardened combat veterans vomit. That made medics question their purpose. That made the enemy call us barbarians. And they weren't wrong, Jake. They really weren't wrong." Sam pointed to the notebook. Turn to page 47. You'll see Danny's improvements. He didn't just stop at the 3-to-1 ratio. He kept experimenting. Tried adding thermite for longer burn times. Tried different dispersal patterns. Tried making it stick to surfaces better. Every modification made it more effective, more deadly, more cruel. Jake found the page. Detailed chemical formulas. Diagrams of explosion patterns. Burn time calculations. And in the margins repeated over and over in Danny's handwriting, more efficient, more effective, more. He got obsessed, Sam said. Danny stopped sleeping, stopped eating properly, just worked, constantly improving, constantly refining. I think he believed if he could make it perfect enough, if he could make it efficient enough, it would somehow justify what we were doing. Like mathematical precision could make up for moral bankruptcy. Sam's gaze drifted to the window. Then there was Bobby Fisher, Private Robert Fisher, 20 years old, farm kid from Iowa, infantry attached to our operations. He grew up butchering hogs and hunting deer. Death didn't bother him, not normally, but Antwerp bothered him. The old man's voice shifted, taking on a different quality. Sadder somehow. Bobby kept a diary. His girlfriend Mary back home had asked him to write down his experiences. After Antwerp, he wrote something that still haunts me. I read it years later when his widow donated it to a museum. He wrote, "We shot Germans today as they burned. Some tried to surrender, but their hands were on fire, so they couldn't raise them proper. One guy's whole face was burning. He was running blind. Sergeant Jackson shot him in the head. Mercy, he said. Maybe, but I still hear how he sounded before Jackson shot. Not like a man, like a pig when you cut wrong and it knows it's dying bad." Jake's throat felt tight. He'd written similar things in his own journal. Things he'd never shown anyone. Things he'd eventually burned because seeing them on paper made them too real. Bobby's unit kept using phosphorus rounds through October and into November, Sam said. Every time Bobby would be there, positioned to capture Germans fleeing burning buildings. Every time he'd see men on fire, men trying to surrender, men dying slow, and every time it ate at him more. Sam turned to look directly at Jake. Early November, his unit hit a German position near the Dutch border. 3 phosphorus rounds. Building caught fire. Germans evacuated. Bobby's squad was positioned to capture them. One German soldier came out, 17, maybe 18 years old. Uniform burning, screaming, trying to surrender, but he couldn't drop his rifle because his hands were burning. Squad leader shot him immediately. Bobby didn't fire, just watched. That night, he wrote another entry. "Mary, I can't do this anymore. I know you'll say I'm a coward, but I'm not running from fighting. I'm running from what we've become. The Germans call our weapon barbaric. They're not wrong. I killed 6 men yesterday. All of them were already dying from burns. I put bullets in suffering men. That's not being a soldier. That's being an executioner. I need to transfer. I need to not be part of the burning anymore." Sam's voice grew heavy. Bobby requested transfer, but here's the part that changed everything. He included a paragraph in his request questioning whether phosphorus weapons violated the Hague Convention, cited specific articles about unnecessary suffering, about weapons designed to maximize agony. Blake had to forward it up the chain of command. Regulations required it. This was new information. Jake leaned forward. "I found out about it when Blake called me to his tent. He showed me Bobby's request. That paragraph about war crimes, about unnecessary suffering. And Blake asked me, 'Hayes, is he right? Are we violating international law?' And I had no answer, because I'd never thought about it. I'd been so focused on saving American lives that I'd never stopped to ask if the method we were using was legal, or moral, or justified." Sam's hands trembled. I confronted Bobby before his transfer went through. Asked him if he realized shutting down the program could cost American lives. And Bobby looked at me with these old eyes and a young face and said, "Sergeant, do you realize we're burning people alive? Is there a difference between us and medieval torturers?" "What did you say?" Jake asked. Nothing. I had nothing to say. Because he was right. There wasn't a difference. Not really. We just industrialized it, made it efficient, given it a technical name and military justification. But at the end of the day, we were burning human beings alive and listening to them scream. That's torture. That's what we were doing, and no amount of military necessity makes that okay. The confession hung in the air. Jake thought about enhanced interrogation, about drone strikes that killed civilians, about all the ways modern warfare tried to sanitize horror with technical language and strategic justification. Bobby's transfer got approved, Sam said. He went to a regular infantry unit, left the burning behind. But before he went, he said something to me. He said, "Sergeant Hayes, you taught me how to burn men alive and call it war. I don't blame you. You were trying to save us, but I can't save myself anymore. Whatever happens next, I can't be part of the burning." Sam closed his eyes. Bobby Fischer killed himself in 1995. 51 years old, put a shotgun in his mouth, left a note that said, "Never stopped hearing them scream. Joining them now." His wife told me at the funeral he had had nightmares every night for 50 years. Woke up screaming about burning men, about executions, about the smell. You never forget the smell, Jake. Burning human flesh. It's sweet and wrong, and it gets in your nose and your throat and your clothes, and you can't wash it out. The machines beeped. The oxygen hissed. Outside, a bird sang oblivious to the confessions happening inside. The Germans started responding. Sam continued, pulling himself back to the narrative. Their medical corps compiled reports on phosphorus casualties, described them as unlike conventional war wounds, detailed the difficulty of treatment, the extreme suffering, the psychological impact on their troops. One report from a senior medical officer used the word barbaric. The report went up to Wehrmacht High Command. Sam's voice took on a bitter edge. They started a propaganda campaign. Leaflets showing burned German soldiers, radio broadcasts calling us war criminals, terror weapon users who burned men alive like medieval torturers. The propaganda was ineffective. German credibility on war crimes was zero by late 1944, but it created documentation. Records that said what we were doing was barbaric, and those records were accurate. Jake listened absorbed. This part wasn't in his grandfather's notebook. This was new. American intelligence intercepted one of their radio broadcasts, Sam said. Included an interview with a German survivor from Antwerp. They identified him only as Corporal Haynes from Dusseldorf. He described our attack, said we shot fire from the sky, that it stuck to everything, that his friend Otto burned and jumped in the canal, but the fire kept burning underwater. He drowned and burned simultaneously. And then the German said something that stuck with me. He said, "These are not soldiers, these are demons." Sam looked at Jake. Was he wrong? When you're burning people alive, when you're causing suffering that goes beyond military necessity, when you're making victims choose between drowning and burning, are you still a soldier, or have you become something else? Jake had no answer. He'd asked himself similar questions about Fallujah, about the civilians, about whether following orders absolved you or just made you complicit. Blake showed me the transcript, Sam said, asked me what I thought. I told him the Germans were calling us war criminals. He asked if they were wrong. I said I didn't know. And I didn't. Still don't. Legally, we were probably in the clear. White phosphorus wasn't a prohibited substance. Improvised weapons weren't illegal. Using them against military targets in combat zones was technically lawful warfare. He paused. But legal isn't the same as moral. And military necessity isn't the same as justified. Bobby Fischer understood that. Crawford the medic understood that. The Germans screaming in the flames understood that. The only ones who didn't understand were the ones like me who'd convinced themselves that saving our side justified anything we did to theirs. Sam's voice grew quieter. That night I tried to write a letter to Emily. She was 16 by then. Writing me about wanting to go to nursing school, about boys she liked, about normal teenage things, and I sat there with a pen and paper trying to explain to her what I'd become, what I'd done. But how do you tell your little sister that her big brother, the one who's supposed to protect her and come home and build a good life, how do you tell her that you've spent months perfecting ways to burn people alive? He gestured weakly at the notebook. It's in there, page 63. The letter I wrote and never sent. I couldn't send it. Couldn't poison her with the truth. So I burned it. just like I burned Germans, just kept burning everything that needed to disappear. Jake found the page, read his grandfather's handwriting from 70 years ago. I'm coming home soon. War's almost over. I've saved enough for your nursing school plus extra. But I need to tell you something. I've done things here I'm not proud of. Things maybe can't be forgiven. I invented a weapon that burns people alive. I trained men to use it. I've killed maybe 100 Germans directly, maybe more indirectly. The captain says I saved American lives. Maybe I did. But I still hear them screaming. I don't think that sound ever goes away. I don't know if I'm still the person you remember. I don't know if I'm a person worth remembering. Jake looked up at his grandfather, seeing him clearly for the first time. Not as the man who'd raised his mother, not as the war hero family legend said he was, but as a 25-year-old kid who'd made impossible choices in impossible circumstances and then had to live with those choices for 70 years. I never sent it, Sam said. Burned it that same night, but writing it helped somehow. Put the words outside my head, made them real, and once they were real, I could start figuring out how to carry them. He shifted in the bed, wincing with pain. The weapon kept spreading. By December, we had 4 Northover teams operating simultaneously, dozens of trained operators, hundreds of rounds manufactured. Danny had standardized the production process. Any pioneer with basic demolitions training could make reliable phosphorus rounds. We'd industrialized burning people alive, made it efficient, repeatable, scalable. Sam's laugh was bitter and broken. We were so proud of ourselves. Blake commended our innovation. Higher command wanted reports on the weapon for possible widespread adoption. We'd solved a tactical problem, saved American lives, created a weapon that forced enemy evacuation of fortified positions with minimal friendly casualties. By every military metric, we'd succeeded. By every human metric, we'd failed catastrophically. The old man's breathing was labored now. Jake moved to call the nurse, but Sam waved him off again. Not yet. Almost done with this part. You need to hear about Klaus Weber, the German who called us barbaric to our faces, because he's the one who made me finally understand what we'd become. Sam's eyes went distant again, seeing across decades. But that's tomorrow's story. Along with the cathedral, and the confession on the ship, and the 70 years after. He looked at Jake. Can you come back tomorrow? Yes. Good. Sam's eyes closed. Tonight you'll dream about them again. The civilians from Fallujah. That's okay. That's the burden. You don't get to forget. You just get to learn how to carry the memory without it destroying you. And Jake, yeah, the fact that it bothers you, the fact that you can't sleep, the fact that you're here listening to an old man confess his sins, that means you're still human. The day it stops bothering you is the day you become a monster. Remember that. Jake sat in silence as his grandfather drifted towards sleep. The notebook lay open on his lap. The metal fragment sat heavy in his pocket. Outside Montana, afternoon was turning toward evening. He thought about Bobby Fischer writing in his diary for 50 years before finally ending it. About Danny Marshall turning his father's chemistry lessons into weapons of agony. About Tom Crawford trying to save a burning teenager and failing. About all the men who'd touched this weapon and been changed by it. And he thought about himself. About the white phosphorus strike in Fallujah. About the bodies afterward. About the intelligence officer who'd sworn there were no civilians. About the lieutenant who'd ordered the strike anyway. About Jake who'd called in the coordinates because it was his job, his duty, his responsibility to protect his men. Both things were true. He'd protected his men. He'd killed civilians. Which mattered more? His grandfather was right. There was no answer. Just the burden. Just the weight of carrying both truths simultaneously and trying not to let it crush you. Jake stood carefully, not wanting to wake Sam. But the old man's eyes opened one more time. Jake, one more thing. Yes. Thank you for listening, for hearing this, for being here. Emily, your grandmother, she's a good woman, but she never could have heard this story. Too pure, too innocent. But you've been there. You know what it counts, and that's why I can tell you the truth. Because you're the only one who'll understand. Jake's throat closed. He managed to nod. Tomorrow, Sam said. Tomorrow I'll tell you how it ended. How we burned a cathedral. How a German prisoner held up a mirror and made me see what I'd become. How three men sat on a ship and confessed to each other what we'd never confessed to anyone else. And how I've spent 70 years trying to figure out if redemption is even possible for men like us. The old man's eyes closed again. This time he slipped into sleep. Jake left the room quietly. In the hallway, he passed a nurse who smiled at him, asked if his grandfather was having a good day. Jake said yes, because what else could he say? That his grandfather was confessing to war crimes, that his grandfather had spent 70 years carrying the weight of burning men alive, that his grandfather was trying to save his grandson from the same fate he drove back to his motel. Sat on the bed, pulled out the metal fragment, held it until the edges cut into his palm. That night he dreamed of Fallujah, but for the first time in the dream, he wasn't alone. His grandfather was there, and Danny Marshall, and Bobby Fischer, and Tom Crawford, and all the other men who'd made impossible choices and then had to live with them. In the dream, they sat together in silence, not forgiving each other, not absolving each other, just sitting together, carrying the burden together, understanding that sometimes the only redemption available is the simple act of refusing to let the weight crush you completely. Jake woke at dawn, got coffee, drove back to the nursing home. His grandfather was waiting, the final part of the story ready to be told. Sam was awake when Jake arrived, sitting propped against pillows with the morning light cutting across his weathered face. The notebook lay closed on the bedside table. The old man's hands rested on his lap, trembling slightly. Not from age or medication, Jake realized. From what he was about to say. "Did you sleep?" Sam asked. "A little, so? You?" "Not really. When you get this old, sleep becomes optional. Your body's getting ready to do nothing but sleep, so it practices by keeping you awake." Sam smiled weakly. "Sit down, Jake. This is the hard part. The cathedral, the prisoner, the ship, everything that came after." Jake took his chair. The metal fragment was in his pocket. He'd carried it everywhere since his grandfather had given it to him. A reminder. A burden. "Before I start," Sam said, his voice steady but soft, "I need you to understand something. What I did in the next few months from February to May 1945, that's when I truly became the man I've been running from for 70 years. Everything before was preparation. Everything after was consequence. But those months, that's when I made the choices that defined me." He paused, gathering strength. February 1945. Operation Veritable. The Rhineland campaign. We were pushing into Germany itself. Every town was fortified. Every building was a bunker. The Germans were fighting with the desperation of men who knew they'd already lost but couldn't stop fighting. It was the worst kind of warfare. Bitter. Personal. No quarter given because there was no point in mercy anymore. Sam's eyes went distant, seeing through walls and time. The town of Goch. Medieval center stone buildings, 3 feet thick walls that had stood for centuries. Intelligence said 500 German paratroopers defending it. Elite troops, the kind who'd fight to the last man. American infantry attacked twice, got cut down both times. By noon, we had 50 casualties and hadn't taken a single building. Artillery pounded the town for hours, barely scratched those stone walls. His hands moved, shaping the memory in air. Blake called for my team. 4 Northovers, 60 rounds total, 40 high explosive, 20 phosphorus. He briefed us on the targets: German strong points, machine gun nests, observation posts, and the command center. They were using the town cathedral as their command post. Sam's voice dropped. I stared at Blake when he said that. A cathedral, 13th century stone, walls 6 feet thick, tower giving perfect observation of the entire battlefield. And Blake looked right at me and said, "Hayes, we need that cathedral." I said, "Sir, it's a church." He said, "It's a German strongpoint. Fire." The machines beeped their rhythm. Outside, Montana wind moved through trees. Inside, an old man confessed to burning God's house. I wasn't religious, Jake, never had been. My father died in a mine, and my mother died coughing blood, and my best friend died calling for his mama. And none of that made me believe in a loving God. But standing there looking at that cathedral through binoculars, I felt something. Not fear, not hesitation, just this awareness that I was about to cross a line I couldn't see but knew was there. Sam's breathing grew labored. Danny loaded a phosphorus round. I aimed at the cathedral tower. My hands were steady. They'd been steady since Antwerp, since the canal, since I'd stopped seeing Germans as people and started seeing them as targets. Mathematical problems, calculate trajectory, adjust for wind, fire. Simple. His voice cracked. But it wasn't simple. It was a cathedral. It had stood for 600 years. It had witnessed wars and plagues and the entire arc of human stupidity, and it had survived. And I was about to burn it. For tactical necessity, for military advantage. For all the right reasons that felt completely wrong. Jake leaned forward, caught in the story. Danny said, "It's just a building, Sarge." And I said, "No, Danny, it's never just a building. It's always something more." But I fired anyway, because that's what we do in war. We destroy beautiful things and call it necessity. We burn history and call it progress. We kill and call it duty. Sam's eyes were wet. The round hit the tower, exploded. White phosphorus ignited. I fired again. And again, 6 rounds total. The cathedral burned. Stone doesn't burn, but everything inside does. The wooden beams, the ancient timbers, the pews, the altar, all of it burning with that terrible white heat that doesn't stop. German paratroopers evacuated. Most got shot trying to escape. Some surrendered. The mission was a success. Gauck fell. Acceptable casualties, they said. 32 Americans killed, 90 wounded. His voice went hollow. Blake commended my team. Said we'd saved American lives, shortened the battle, reduced casualties. All true, all accurate, all completely beside the point. Because I'd burned a cathedral. I'd destroyed something that had survived 6 centuries, and I'd done it in 6 minutes. And for what? To save 30, 40, maybe 50 American lives. Is that the math? Does one American life equal one historical building? Does saving our side justify destroying their history? Jake had no answer. In Iraq, they'd called in airstrikes on mosques, ancient buildings, cultural heritage sites. But insurgents had been using them as fighting positions. The math had seemed simple then. Now, hearing his grandfather, the math felt impossible. After Gauck, we kept advancing, Sam continued. The Wehrmacht was collapsing. German resistance was sporadic. We'd fire a few rounds, Germans would surrender or run. The war was ending. Everyone could feel it. Victory was close enough to taste, but I couldn't taste anything except ash. Sam shifted in the bed, wincing. April 15th, 1945. Small German unit barricaded in a farmhouse near the Elbe River. Maybe 30 men. They were calling artillery on our positions. Had to be neutralized. Blake assigned it to me, standard operation by then. Set up the Northover. Fire, clear the position. Simple. His hands trembled more visibly now. I loaded a round, high explosive, not phosphorus. I'd decided after the cathedral that I was done with burning. Done with phosphorus. Done with making men choose between death by fire or death by drowning. This would be my last shot. Round number 847. I'd counted them all, even though I said I didn't. You always count, Jake, even when you don't want to. Especially when you don't want to. Sam's voice grew stronger, like he was pulling strength from the memory. I aimed, I fired. The round hit the farmhouse, exploded. Germans evacuated with hands raised, no weapons. They surrendered immediately. It was over. My last shot of the war was a surrender. Not a kill. That felt like something. Not redemption, but something. A small mercy in an ocean of cruelty. The old man closed his eyes. May 8th, 1945. VE Day. Germany surrendered. The war in Europe was over. The battalion celebrated, drinking liberated German beer, firing rifles in the air, crying and laughing and trying to believe we'd survived. But I didn't celebrate. I sat alone cleaning my Northover one last time. Danny found me there. Sam's voice took on the quality of remembered dialogue. He said, "We won, Sarge. We actually won." I said, "Yeah, we won." And we sat there in silence because what else was there to say? We'd helped win the war. We'd burned people alive to do it. Both things were true. Celebrating one meant acknowledging the other. So we just sat. The machines beeped. The oxygen hissed. The story continued. Blake came with orders. Headquarters wanted all Northovers destroyed. The rounds were too unstable to ship home, too dangerous to store. We were to detonate everything the next day. All the weapons, all the ammunition, all the manufacturing equipment. Destroy it all and pretend it never existed. Sam opened his eyes, looking directly at Jake. I said good. Burn it all, sir. And I meant it. I wanted it gone. Wanted no evidence, no record, no way for anyone to recreate what we'd built. But I was naive, Jake. You can't destroy knowledge. You can destroy the weapon, but you can't destroy the knowing. It was in my head, in Danny's notebooks, in the memories of every soldier who'd used it. You can't uninvent something once it exists. His voice grew bitter. The next morning, we detonated everything. Controlled demolition, 4 Northovers, 200 rounds, all the equipment. The explosion was massive. Mushroom cloud rising into the German sky. I watched from 300 yards away. Blake said, that's it. The barbaric weapon is gone. But I knew better. It wasn't gone. It would never be gone. Sam paused, building toward something. After the destruction, we prepared to go home. June 1945. 10 days crossing the Atlantic. Me, Danny, and Blake on the same transport ship. We didn't talk much about the war, played cards, read letters from home, planned civilian lives. I was going back to Montana, construction work, bring Emily to live with me. Danny was going to Michigan, finish his chemistry degree. His mother wanted him to teach. Blake was going to Boston, rebuild his engineering firm. His wife was pregnant. The old man's expression darkened. We were all lying to ourselves about normal life. But on the last night of the crossing, we stopped lying. The 3 of us sat on deck. Ocean was calm. Stars were bright. We got drunk enough to be honest. And Blake started it. He said, I kept a list of every man I lost, 147 names. I tell myself the Northover saved more than it cost, but I'll never know for sure. Sam's voice carried the weight of decades. Danny went next. He said, my father was right. Science is supposed to save lives. I used it to burn people. I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to make that right, and I'll never succeed. And then it was my turn. I said I just wanted to save Mike Daniels. Instead, I created something that made me worse than the enemy I was fighting. That German prisoner was right. It was barbaric, and I'd do it again. The confession hung in the air like smoke. We sat in silence after that. What else could we say? We'd made our choices, saved American lives, lost our souls. Both things were true, and we were going home to pretend we were heroes instead of what we really were. Damaged men who'd crossed lines we couldn't uncross and would spend the rest of our lives trying to justify it. Sam's breathing was labored now, but he pushed on. The story was almost done, the burden almost shared. We landed in New York, June 1945. Crowds cheering. Welcome home, heroes. Bands playing. I stood on that dock with confetti falling and people crying happy tears, and all I could think about was the German kid burning in the canal. The teenager Crawford couldn't save. The cathedral collapsing in flames, and I smiled and waved because that's what heroes do. His voice broke. I went to Montana, got a job in construction, brought Emily to live with me. She was 17 by then, beautiful, smart, wanted to be a nurse. I paid for her education with blood money, combat pay earned by burning men alive. And I never told her. Never told anyone until now. Jake's own eyes were wet. He understood. Some stories you can't tell. Some truths you can't share because sharing them would poison the people you love. Johnny Walker killed himself in 1947, Sam said. Put a pistol in his mouth. His wife said he'd been having nightmares. I went to the funeral. Didn't cry. Couldn't. Because crying would mean admitting it was my fault, that I'd broken him with those tests, with the explosions, with everything. The litany of damage continued. Danny Marshall died in 1978, heart attack at 56. I read his obituary, called him a beloved chemistry professor, dedicated teacher, wonderful father. Didn't mention the war, didn't mention what his chemistry had created. His family never knew. They thought he was a hero. Maybe he was. Maybe we all were. Maybe both things are true. Sam's voice dropped to barely a whisper. Blake died in 1985. Cancer. I went to the funeral. Big ceremony. Hundreds of people. His engineering firm had built bridges across New England. The mayor spoke, called him a pillar of the community, war hero, family man. I looked at his coffin and thought about that night on the ship, the confession, the burden, and I wondered if he'd carried it better than me or just hidden it deeper. Tears ran freely down the old man's face now. Bobby Fischer lasted the longest, died in 1995. Suicide, shotgun. Left a note that said, never stopped hearing them scream, joining them now. He was 51, farm in Iowa, wife, 4 kids, 7 grandchildren. Normal life except for the nightmares, except for the screaming in his head that never stopped. I went to that funeral too. His wife knew who I was, looked at me and said, he talked about you sometimes, said you were the one who taught him how to kill, said he never blamed you but never forgave you either. And what could I say to that? The room was silent except for the machines and the soft sound of Jake crying. I lived, Jake. That's my punishment. Everyone else who touched that weapon, they all died. Johnny, Danny, Blake, Bobby, all gone. But I lived. 96 years old and still here. Still remembering, still carrying. That's the real burden. Not the guilt, not the nightmares, but the living. The having to wake up every morning and choose to keep going when you're not sure you deserve to. Sam looked at his grandson with eyes that had seen too much and remembered everything. Emily died in 2010, 81 years old, peaceful in her sleep. She never knew what I'd done, never knew the money that paid for her nursing school came from burning men alive. She thought I was a hero, her big brother who went to war and came home and built a good life. And I let her think that because the truth would have destroyed her. The old man's voice strengthened one final time. Your mother, Emily's daughter, she doesn't know either. Thinks her grandfather was a war hero, brave soldier who served his country. That's why she sent you to me. Thought maybe the old war hero could help the young veteran. Thought maybe I could save you. But Jake, I can't save you. I can only show you how to carry the weight, how to live with what you've done, how to be both hero and monster and somehow keep breathing. Jake wiped his eyes. The prisoner. You said a German prisoner called you barbaric to your face. What happened? Sam nodded. I wondered if you'd remember that. Yes, there was a prisoner after Goch, Klaus Weber, German corporal. He'd been an Unteroffizier in a paratrooper unit. But here's the thing about Weber. He spoke perfect English, grew up in Milwaukee until 1938, went back to Germany to take care of his dying mother, got drafted. He wasn't a Nazi, just a German. The story took a turn Jake hadn't expected. American intelligence officer was interrogating him, Captain Lawrence Green, New York lawyer in civilian life. I was outside the tent, smoking. Weber saw my Northover team cleaning weapons, recognized them immediately, and he said to Green, that's it, that's the barbaric weapon. Green was interested, asked him to explain. Sam's voice took on the cadence of remembered conversation. Weber described finding the first Northover victims back in July 1944, described the injuries, the confusion, the fear. Then he described Antwerp, described Goch, and then he said something that I've heard in my head every day for 70 years. He said, you are burning us alive and calling it war. The Hague Convention prohibits weapons that cause unnecessary suffering. This weapon is designed specifically to maximize suffering. In 20 years, when historians write about this war, they will judge you for this. Sam's hands gripped the blanket. Green closed his notebook and said, in 20 years, Corporal will have won, and nobody cares how the winner won. And Weber leaned forward and said, 2 wrongs don't make a right, Captain. Your weapon crosses a line. You know it. Your sergeant knows it. History will know it. The old man's eyes locked on Jake. I was standing outside the tent, heard everything. And Weber was right about all of it. We had crossed a line. We did know it. And now history is knowing it because I'm telling you. Telling you so you understand that victory doesn't absolve. Success doesn't justify. We won the war. We burned people alive to do it. Both things are true. Both things matter. Jake sat in silence processing. His grandfather had lived with this for 70 years, carried this burden every single day, and now he was passing it to Jake, not to punish him, to save him, to show him it was possible to carry impossible weight and still keep breathing. After I heard Weber, Sam said, I tried to write another letter to Emily, tried to explain everything, what I'd done, what I'd become, but the words wouldn't come. How do you tell someone you love that you're a monster who did monstrous things for good reasons? How do you explain that you'd do it all again because the alternative was letting your friends die? You can't. So I burned that letter too. His voice grew softer. For 70 years I carried this alone. Didn't tell Emily. Didn't tell your mother. Didn't tell anyone until a historian found me in 1978. Patricia Coleman, young professor, researching improvised weapons. She asked the question everyone asks. Was the weapon barbaric like the Germans claimed? And I told her yes, it was barbaric. And it was effective. Both things were true. Both things mattered. And I didn't know which mattered more. Sam pointed at the notebook. She published her findings, called the article, The American Northover Innovation and Ethics in World War II Improvised Weapons. Conclusion was that we'd crossed ethical boundaries but saved lives. That we were neither heroes nor villains, but humans making impossible choices. The article sits in a university library somewhere. Maybe 10 people have read it. The weapon I invented that burned hundreds of people, maybe thousands, it's a footnote, a minor technical curiosity. Nobody remembers. Nobody cares. His voice grew thick with emotion. Except me. I remember, I care, every single day, every scream, every burning face, every choice, every justification. All of it. That's my punishment, Jake. Not prison, not execution, not even guilt, really. Just memory, just knowing, just carrying the truth that I was both hero and monster, and I'll never know which one I really was. The old man was exhausted now, the confession having drained whatever strength remained. But he had one more thing to say. Jake, why did you come here? Really? Jake's voice was rough. Mom said you might understand, said you were in the war, said you'd know what I'm going through. And do I? Yes. Sam nodded slowly. What happened in Fallujah? What choice did you make that's keeping you awake at night? Jake took a breath. White phosphorus strike. Intelligence said high-value target, building full of insurgents. Also said possible civilian presence. My lieutenant asked for my assessment. I'd seen the building, knew the angles. Knew if we didn't take it, they'd use it to hit our convoy. So I called in the strike. And 7 insurgents, 4 civilians, 2 of them children. Jake's voice broke. Intelligence was wrong about it being clear. I called in the strike anyway, saved my unit, killed kids. Both things are true. Sam reached out with a trembling hand, gripped Jake's wrist like he had 3 days ago. Listen to me, are you listening? Yes. You're not a monster, you're not a hero. You're a human who made an impossible choice with incomplete information and people you cared about depending on you. You saved your unit. You killed civilians. Both things are true. Both things matter. And you're going to carry both for the rest of your life. That's the price. That's the burden. And it's a burden you can carry. I know because I've carried mine for 70 years. Jake was crying openly now. How do you carry it? You wake up, you breathe, you try to be better today than you were yesterday. Some days you succeed, most days you fail. But you keep trying. You don't get forgiveness, Jake. You don't get redemption. You just get to keep living. And if you can help one person save one life, make one choice that's slightly better than the choice you made before, then maybe the weight gets a little lighter. Not much, but a little. That's all we get. The old man released Jake's wrist, reached under his pillow, pulled out an envelope. This is for you. After I'm gone. It's a letter, my final letter. Everything I couldn't say to Emily or your mother or anyone else, all of it. The truth, the whole truth. Read it after the funeral. Decide then what you want to do with it. Burn it like I burned my letters. Keep it like I kept this notebook. Share it. Whatever. It's your burden then. Jake took the envelope with shaking hands. One more thing, Sam said. His voice was fading now, strength finally giving out. That metal piece I gave you, the fragment from the exploded Northover. I want you to keep it. Pass it down. Tell this story to someone who needs to hear it. Your son, maybe. Your grandson. Some young soldier trying to figure out if he's a monster for doing what war demanded. Tell them what I told you. Both things can be true. Hero and monster. Saver and killer. You can be both. And the burden is learning to carry that truth. A nurse entered, saw Sam's vitals on the monitor, and moved quickly to adjust medications. He needs rest now, she said to Jake. You should come back tomorrow. Jake stood. Grandpa, I'll be back. Sam's eyes were already closing, but he whispered one final thing. Thank you for listening, for hearing, for understanding. You are the only one who could, the only one who needed to. Now you carry it too, but you don't carry it alone. I'm with you. All of us are with you. Everyone who made impossible choices and then had to live with them, we're all carrying it together. Jake left the room. In the hallway, the world seemed too bright, too normal. People walking, talking, living as if old men weren't confessing to burning people alive just down the hall. He drove to his motel, sat on the bed, opened the envelope, even though Sam had said to wait. Inside, in his grandfather's shaky handwriting, to whoever reads this after I'm gone, I invented a weapon Germans called barbaric. They weren't wrong. I saved American lives. Also true. I destroyed my own soul doing it. Also true. The question isn't, was I hero or monster? The question is, can you live with being both? If answer is yes, proceed with caution. If answer is no good, you're better than I. But if you're a soldier carrying burden like I carried, like my grandson Jake carries, know this. The burden is the price. You pay it. You don't get escape. You don't get forgiveness. You get wake up every morning and try to be better person than yesterday. Some days succeed, most days fail. Keep trying. That's all any of us can do. Sam Hayes, Sergeant, U.S. Army, inventor of barbaric weapon, saver of lives, taker of lives, human being, 1919 to 2015. Jake read it 3 times, then he pulled out his own notebook, the one the VA therapist had asked him to keep, the one he'd been too afraid to write in. He opened to the first page, wrote in careful letters, "My name is Jake Hayes, Iraq War 2008 to 2009. This is my story. This is my burden. This is my truth." And then he began to write about Fallujah, about the white phosphorus strike, about the intelligence report and the lieutenant's question and the decision he'd made, about the 7 insurgents and the 4 civilians and the 2 children, about both things being true, about learning to carry weight you could never put down. 3 days later, Samuel Hayes died in his sleep, aged 96. The funeral was small, family only. The obituary read, Samuel Hayes, World War II veteran, beloved brother, uncle, great-grandfather. Survived by niece Emily Hayes Miller and numerous family members. Private service. It didn't mention the Northover, didn't mention white phosphorus, didn't mention 847 shots fired over 10 months of war, didn't mention a weapon Germans called barbaric, didn't mention any of it. At the funeral, Jake gave the eulogy. His mother had asked him to, said Grandpa Sam would have wanted Jake to speak. Jake stood at the podium, looked at the small crowd, his mother, his aunt, cousins he barely knew, people who thought Sam Hayes was a hero. And Jake realized his grandfather had been right. They didn't need the truth. They needed the story, the comfortable fiction that men went to war and came home heroes, the lie that made sense of sacrifice. But Jake also realized something else. The truth mattered too, not for everyone, but for people like him, people carrying impossible weight, people trying to figure out if they were monsters or heroes, or just humans who'd made terrible choices in terrible circumstances. So Jake told 2 stories, the public one for the crowd, and the private one whispered just loud enough for the dead to hear. My grandfather taught me the most important lesson a soldier can learn, Jake said. He taught me that in war, there are no clean hands, only humans trying to survive, making terrible choices, living with consequences. He carried his burden for 70 years of remembering, 70 years of trying to figure out if he was a hero or a monster. And what he finally understood, what he taught me, is that he was both. We're all both, hero and monster, saver and destroyer. Both things can be true at the same time, and the burden is learning to carry that truth without letting it destroy you. He placed the metal fragment on his grandfather's coffin, the piece of twisted steel that had traveled from France to Montana to Jake's pocket. The reminder that every choice has a cost, that every weapon creates victims, that survival sometimes requires becoming what you hate. Rest now, Grandpa, Jake said quietly. You've carried it long enough. I'll carry it from here. After the funeral, his mother gave him a box, said Sam had left it for him. Inside was the notebook and a letter. The letter was brief. Jake, you came to me broken, wondering if you were a monster. I told you the truth. You're not. You're just human. And humans break in war. But we also heal. Not completely, never completely. But enough. Enough to keep going, enough to help the next person. Enough to make the burden lighter by sharing it. Thank you for letting me share mine. Now it's yours. Use it wisely. Help someone else carry their burden. Pass the fragment down. Tell the story. Make sure nobody forgets that war makes monsters of good men, and the only redemption is refusing to let the monster win. Sam. Jake sat in his motel room that night, the notebook open, the metal fragment beside him. His mother had gone back to Seattle. The funeral was over. Sam Hayes was buried. The story was finished. Except it wasn't finished. It would never be finished. Because the burden didn't end. It just passed from one carrier to the next. Sam to Jake, Jake to whoever came next. An unbroken chain of men trying to figure out how to live with impossible choices. Jake opened his own notebook. Read what he'd written about Fallujah, about the children, about both things being true. Then he wrote one more entry. Today I buried my grandfather, the man who taught me that monsters and heroes are the same people seen from different angles. The man who carried his burden for 70 years so I could learn how to carry mine. I don't know if I'm a hero. I don't know if I'm a monster, but I know I'm human, and that's enough. It has to be enough, because it's all any of us get. He closed the notebook, turned off the light, lay in darkness holding the metal fragment. Tomorrow he would go back to Seattle, see the VA therapist. Maybe actually talk this time. Maybe tell the truth about Fallujah. Maybe start the long process of healing that would never be complete but might be enough. Tomorrow he would call his mother, tell her he loved her, thank her for sending him to Sam. Not explain why, just thank her. Tomorrow he would take the first step toward carrying his burden the way his grandfather had carried his. Not with pride, not with shame, just with honesty, with acceptance, with the knowledge that he would never escape what he'd done, but he could learn to live with it. But tonight he dreamed. In the dream he stood in a field, Montana mountains in the distance, and Sam was there, young again, 25 years old, years. The age he'd been when he'd invented the barbaric weapon. And Danny Marshall was there, and Bobby Fischer, and Tom Crawford, and all the other men who'd touched that weapon and been changed by it. They stood together in silence, not forgiving each other, not absolving each other, just standing, carrying their burdens, sharing the weight. And in the dream, Jake understood. This was redemption, not forgiveness, not escape, just the simple truth that you don't carry impossible weight alone. That every soldier who ever made a terrible choice stands with you. That the chain of burden bearers stretches back through history and forward into the future. That you're part of something larger than yourself, something terrible and necessary and human. Jake woke at dawn, got coffee, looked at the mountains his grandfather had stared at for decades while carrying the weight of 847 shots fired in anger. He understood now. Both things were true. The war had made his grandfather a monster. The war had made his grandfather a hero. And somehow, impossibly miraculously, his grandfather had lived with both truths for 70 years. If Sam Hayes could do it, maybe Jake could too. He packed his bag, put the notebook and the metal fragment carefully in his backpack, started the long drive back to Seattle, back to life, back to the slow, painful work of healing. Behind him, Montana receded. Ahead, the future waited, uncertain, difficult, but possible. Both things were true. He was broken. He could heal. Both things mattered. The burden was real. The burden could be carried. And that finally was enough. The story of the barbaric weapon ends here. Not with redemption, not with forgiveness, not with clean resolution, but with understanding, with acceptance. With the simple truth that war creates monsters and heroes often in the same person, and the measure of a life isn't whether you avoided becoming monstrous, but whether you carried that knowledge without letting it destroy you. Sam Hayes carried his burden for 70 years. Now Jake Hayes would carry his. And someday, years from now, Jake would pass the metal fragment to someone else. Another soldier, another burden bearer, another human trying to figure out how to live with impossible choices. The chain would continue, the burden would pass, the story would be told. Again, because that's what we owe to those who came before. Not judgment, not absolution, just witness, just remembering, just the honest truth that war demands terrible things from good people, and the only sin is pretending it doesn't. Both things are true. That's the lesson. That's the burden. That's the price of being human in a world that sometimes requires inhumanity. And somehow, impossibly, we carry it. We carry each other, and we keep going. That's all any of us can do. That's enough.